working. So I got to change up all of my mealworms. So I figured what we could do is do these mealworm stuff things, but do them live. That way, we can check and talk about what we are actually doing with these worms, with these beetles, with all of this fun insect stuff, because I need an excuse to do a live stream. And also, hey, look at that. That's just called content that I can use for a future video. Let me grab... Oh, wait, just come with me. It's mobile. We are going to grab my laptop really quick because I need to start notating all of the mealworm information. And then we can start talking about what the hell I'm doing here. Okay, where's about mealyworms? There we go. So, I need to start putting some stickers on this laptop. Okay, so right here in these bins are mealworms. And right now I have 2 bins that are currently going. This one, as we can see, is filled with beetles. These are the adults, darkling beetles that end up creating all of the mealworms that we shall have in the coming months. This right here is a container that is filled with mealworm eggs and little bitty mealyworms. So I want to see if we can start to really see them. Yes. So look here at the potato of truth. So within the potato, we have all the oats that are sticking to it, and we have a mealworm. Do you see them? Right there. There is the worm, one of our youngest. Haha. So, there's probably a couple thousand mealworms in here. Now, currently, we do not have good ways of actually measuring how many mealworms we have. And so, this is something that we are going to work on, and we are actually going to dive into later on in future videos. And what do I mean by that? What we are going to do is teach you how we actually are able to estimate the number of mealworms inside of these bins. There's a couple ways that we can do it. Now, wait. No. So right now I need to be like a little bit more careful about checking my potatoes inside of the mealworm container because I don't want to get any eggs or any worms in my trash, right? Because what's up, people? So right now I'm checking. If you're just joining in, I'm checking and changing all of my mealworm bins. We started a big mealworm colony a while back. These are the beetles that we'll look into a little bit later on. But the goal is to breed up 1 million mealworms. And I do have a couple ways that I will show you how you can actually count mealworms. Most people in the trade, whenever they're actually working with mealworms, they weigh them. So you can like measure out what 100 mealworms looks like. And then you can say, oh, hey, if you have 100 grams and there's 100 mealworms, well then 1,000 grams is 1,000 mealworms. 1 million grams is 1 million mealworms, right? That's the standard way of doing it, but there's another way that you can do it that is way too complicated, way over the top, and, well, hey, it actually gets you a more exact number. It's what you do to actually estimate populations in the wild. So it's called capture, mark, recapture, and it's this statistical method where you can basically gather a set number of individuals, mark them in some way, like a little piece of paint or tie a ribbon on them or something like that, release them, okay, and then you capture up a whole bunch again, and then you count how many you captured that are new and how many you recaptured, and you can apply some really simple math to that to get the total population. We are going to try doing that for the beetles. But because I can actually count the beetles, because there's like less than 50 of them. But we started all of this entire colony from one mealworm container from the pet store. So I just bought one, I think 100 count is what I started with. Raised all of them up to the beetle stage, or at least as many as I could. And then now we have our Gen 1 inside of this container. So on my laptop here, I started up a Google Sheet to actually notate all of this. And of course I didn't get set up in a hello, how are y'all doing? I always like to know where y'all are tuning in from, but I have no idea what spreadsheet I'm looking at. What the hell is this? What was that? Or was that it? I have no idea what this spreadsheet is. I guess I need to make a new spreadsheet. Okay, so I am actually going to be notating how many beetles we have every single bi-weekly period, fortnightly period. So that's every 14 days. That's when I'm going to be exchanging these containers. So every 2 weeks, we move all of the beetles to a brand new container. That container then is filled with mealworm eggs and mealworm larvae. I guess at that point, just the eggs. They then hatch and then become larvae. And then 6 to 10 weeks later, depending on temperature and moisture and a million other variables, they then become beetles. And then the life cycle keeps on going. So right now, let's see, what do we want to put on this spreadsheet? We are going to put the date, and the way we're approaching this mealworm way, there's actually like some really great people on YouTube that already show you like how to manage mealworms and like how to raise them and do them efficiently, especially if you're doing it for like pet trade stuff. The way we're using mealworms for this channel and all this other stuff is actually for like purely educational props in a way. I know that's like weird to say for like living beings and whatnot, but that's realistically how we're using them. So like we said, for estimating population size, but I also want to do things like rearing them in different conditions and different temperatures and showing how you can set up an experimental design for research and how you can create digital research forms to collect data in a more easier way. So just know that the way we're going to be talking about mealworms is a more academic, scientific, kind of ecologically based, and a little bit less, I don't know, agricultural, because that's technically what it's considered if you're rearing them. So on this spreadsheet, kind of where I'm getting at is that this spreadsheet is going to be more based on like science numbers and like trying to set up research stuff, but we're going to develop this over time, and all of this is also up on the website is kind of the step 3 or 4 of this spreadsheet. So we need date. We're going to do num beetles, so that's going to be the number of beetles. We're going to put a value for num larvae, but we really don't have a great way to estimate that at this stage, just because the larvae are going to be much smaller. And but maybe in about 3 or 4 weeks, we'll be able to start weighing the larvae. Used to feed mealworms to emperor scorpions. Yeah, so I grew up in a pet store, and like my family builds aquariums, and they build like the pet store fixtures. So if you go to like Petco's or whatnot, they build like the little aquarium things that all the stuff are in. Not Petco actually, but just as an example. But yeah, so like emperor scorpions were actually one of my favorites. We used to have these like hats for the pet store. We would put scorpions on the hats while we were checking people out. They're cool. They're really cool. Scorpions in general and arachnids in general, actually, I really, really dig. But first things first is we need to go through the beetle container, count the number of beetles, remove some of the dead ones, and replace the potatoes. So let me grab, you guys can come with me. We have our little death container, which is also the container that all the mealworms came in, so the 100 count from Bugco, because some of the beetles or some of the larvae didn't survive at different stages, and I wanted to save all of them because I want to count up. We started with 98, we did a count, and I wanted to see how many dead showed up in here, how many turned into beetles, how many of those beetles died, etc., etc., etc. So we have that, and then I'm going to grab just a couple potatoes. We don't really have a whole lot of mealworms yet.
But yeah, so I used to breed mealworms professionally then in that pet store. Um, I used to have a pretty crazy setup, a whole bunch of concrete mixing bins, right? So these big old dark plastic tubs, and I put in, all the mealworms, all the different stages of beetles, larvae, eggs, etc., and I rotated them every 2 weeks. And then I was selling them to people, so selling out thousands of mealworms a week. And so now it's just like here I am. How many years later? 12 years later, going right back to it. That says something about the economy. But yes, let's look at the mealworm container. So I haven't replaced these potatoes in like a week. Unfortunately, it's a little longer than I normally like to do, but we're developing a new protocol. So the potatoes, I just replaced the whole potatoes. Technically, they still have a lot of moisture in them. That's really all the potatoes are there for. Let me adjust this tripod a little bit. Yeah, so the potatoes, do 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 do, ha, are just for moisture for the beetles. So if we look inside, these always have like kind of a outer crust in a way that develops. But if you like rip it in, you can see just how much moisture is captured in that potato. So I could be reusing this, and in fact, I probably will. I just like to cut off these outer parts when I'm doing it at this stage, because these end up molding. So we'll just do it really quick. Ripping it in half like that is also a pretty solid way. But the mold can just be really annoying because it will get into the oats. But yeah, the oats are of course what the beetles are eating, and the mealworms as well. So yeah, do 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 do. But we just want to make sure they have enough moisture for about a week because I'll be out of town. Yeah, but general procedure is I replace these potatoes pretty often. Um, I like putting them on this cardboard. The cardboard also gives them cover, so a lot of the beetles like to be underneath. And I I have this one worm in here. This is from the original batch, and it just still has not started to pupate. I like don't really know what to do with you. Now it's starting to look like it might. I don't know. It's looking a little bit fatter, but this one is just taking its sweet time. There is natural variation in how long the larvae will develop, right? Because all these came from the same batch, and these ones, we're already on the next generation, and this one is still taking its sweet time, even though it was around the same size. So, I know some breeders will remove them if they take this long because then they're going to develop into a beetle that passes on genes for also growing slower. So that's just not advantageous. Advantageous? Ew, advantageous. But I'm not really going for efficiency yet. We'll do some experiments with that at some point and really like codify it down. But for right now, he just lives in there. Yeah, so I might. Oops, sorry, let me show you. I might. Sorry, let's get y'all off of here. Um, get off of me. I think I will throw this one out just because it's tunneled in a bit more. And I want to keep some that have the skins still on because it helps retain the moisture long term. So, boom, there we go. So basically, all that I did right there is basically all I need to do every couple weeks at this stage. Really, I mean, even when I have more mealworms and more beetles, it's about the same. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to go through and I'm going to count up the number of beetles counted, number of dead beetles removed. And then we're going to enter it into our spreadsheet over here. Eventually, we'll try to run some statistics on this, maybe do some data visualizations. But here, let me also, yeah, date num beetles, num dead beetles removed. So, let's see. One, unfortunately, we just had a couple cold snaps come through, so I'm worried that might have killed off a few of our beetles. So, one, two, and also I've been out of town, so wasn't really watching them as well as I should. Get off of me. 8. Oh, no, you're alive. Luckily, all the dead ones usually come up to the top. I think I'm only going to see 8 removed dead. The dead removed isn't really going to be too solid of a metric. I just want to note it just in case it becomes, because also it's like really hard to tell in case of like a molt versus like pieces, because some of these break apart and it's like, well, I have the head of a beetle and the body of 2. Do I count that as 2? Do I count that as 3? So yeah, but then I'm just going to do a quick count for the number of live beetles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't really have a great way of counting these. Yeah, because I'm not moving them this week. So next week we'll move the beetles to a new container next week, and then we'll do a big full count. So we'll just put an NA for the number of beetles counted. It's just easier to do the full count when you actually move the beetles, because you, of course, are moving beetles. But then it's a lot of agitation for here, and I want to give them another week to lay more eggs inside of this substrate. Maybe even 2 more weeks. Just with the cold, they reproduce a little bit slower. But we're not going to have an explosion of mealworms for another couple months. So this is really documenting some of the more early stages. We have like a lot of images of the dead mealworms and stuff, and the early like initial pupations. Those are all in the Discord server. But now let's look at the mealworm container, and let's try to find some small mealworms. Now, we did point out inside of this potato there was a tiny mealworm. So we can see him right here underneath that fold right there. So you can see, let's see if there we go, you can see him coming out. There we go. So that's one of our first generation mealworms, right? So here's the F1s, the ones that we mated, that we got from mating the beetles that we just had on screen. But inside of this entire container is actually far more mealworms than you would expect. So first we're going to do is just kind of check to make sure we're not losing any mealworms in this potato. This one looks fine. Just looking dry, so we'll replace it with a brand new potato. And then this one, we just want to get this little one out. We have enough in here, but, you know, no worm left behind type of stuff. So, I just do this to kind of like crack it open, see, make sure none are underneath the skins. Okay, now, so we'll toss all those. But now, let's actually look through here. So again, we don't really have great ways of estimating the number of mealworms yet, because they are this size, right? This is probably one of the larger ones. And it is, what, that size? Whenever we have more mealworms, we'll actually start to like notate things like, you know, size of mealworms. We'll do some studies where we measure them every single day, put them in little things, and actually just like really get some fine scale measurement. But we can still see our mealworms, right, by looking inside of our container. Now, there may be some mealworms inside of this cardboard. I put this in there for them for a reason, so we'll just move it to the other container for a second. But let's do this. So I just like to agitate all of the oats, kind of move them to one side, and then yeah, so look at this. Now if we look real closely, let's see if I can get this. Can I zoom in on this live stream? Here, let me take y'all out of the container. If we zoom in, we can see more worms, right? So you can see one right there. We got another one. Let's see, the trick is trying to figure out where my camera's looking. There we go. So there you can see a couple. And what will start to happen is if you look at the pile, right? So this is the whole pile that we just made. If you start to look at it, what I start to look for is movement. Now, with these larger oats, you don't see it as well. Eventually, we are going to convert these to the like quick oats or ground up wheat bran, something that's a lot finer. This was just what I had on hand, and this is what I wanted to start with. But normally, when you have something that's more of a powder, something that you could filter, when you move it all up and you kick it up, it'll start to move. The whole thing will just kind of spread out because it's filled with mealworms. And that's what's going to happen as these start to grow and develop. So again, we weren't working with too many beetles. We didn't have too many eggs, and we didn't have them in there for too crazy long. And we had much lower temperatures. But the point that I care about is that we do see worm activity. Because that means, well, they're living. And again, there's a lot more than you think. Like, as you zoom in, you start to realize, oh, wait, that little oat is moving, and that little oat is moving. Oh, wait a second, all of the little oats are moving. How many worms are there really underneath all of this, right? So, let's see if we can find any more coming out. The zoom on this phone is actually really nice for this, because you can just kind of sit still and look at it. But yeah, so this is really all that I'm doing. Sometimes I'll just mix it all up like that. Kind of just see if there's anything moving, anything crawling around. But there's really not much for me to do at this stage. Yeah. So we're going to put everything back. We're going to make sure, boom, the mealworms have a little bit of cover up the darkness, and just something for moisture. I think I'll put it down like that. Easier for them to access. But yeah. We're going to be doing these streams way more often. I want to do them basically every time I'm updating the mealworms. And yeah, we're just keeping them right here in this closet for now. But yeah, expect these every couple of weeks. I'm doing them half to just notate what we're actually doing, right? Kind of notate or document, sorry, what we're actually doing with these mealworms. Because I also want to see, the change over time as we start to do more, as we start actually counting worms, as we start estimating sizes and growth rates and all of this stuff. Because right now we just don't have enough data to make that worthwhile to do. But that's one side of it, and the other one is also just to stream regularly. I want to do these as well as the ones where I'm just out in the woods or going looking for something. But these ones are a lot more fun because we can start here, we can go over to the computer, we can just sort of bounce around. These are sort of my at-home stream days, and normally I wanted to do more. Today I'm kind of battling migraines on and off, but we would go over to the computer and write up the little update and do a little Q&A, do some whiteboard stuff, record some videos, and just sort of hang out. But for now, this is all we got for the mealworms. By the end of the year, we should have 1 million. That's the goal. See you then.